Bonjour everyone, in today's video I'll be showing you how to make a one-piece raglan sleeve and two-piece raglan sleeve. And first I start by copying my sleeve onto a piece of paper, and I have my reduced ease sleeve here to lay over the sleeve I copied just so you can see how much ease I have on top. So just to show you how much ease my sleeve actually has. So right here I'm showing you how things are going to be laid out. It is going to be notches to notches, and then I bring the shoulder tip 3/8 of an inch from the center line of my sleeve. And the reason why I do that is because my sleeve has a lot of ease onto it. If I just bring the sleeve on top of my sleeve head, it would end up with a very large dot because I'm using my setting sleeve. So here I'm showing you what things would normally look like on a typical pattern that you would see. The shoulder tip would be on top of the sleeve head, and it's not even that far from the center line, so you would get a decent dot going. But if I do that with my set-in sleeve, I would get a very large dot, which would end up with a very pointy point when I sew it together. So that's why I am doing things different with my set-in sleeves, and I'm blending some of the ease into my shoulder. I don't want to use my reduced ease sleeve because it does have wrinkles, and whatever your sleeve looks like, that's what you will get when you have the raglan sleeve going. So my set-in sleeve, I don't have wrinkles, so I prefer to use that because I don't want wrinkles on my raglan sleeve either. So I start by marking the middle of my neck curve, and I am drawing a line to my notch from the neck, from the middle of my neck to my notch point at the front. And it took some trial and error to get a curve that is going to blend in with my armhole. So I did have to use a few rulers before I got something that was decent in my eyes. So that's what you're seeing here, just the amount of effort it took for me to actually get a curve. You can do whatever you want. You can have the curve lower. I will show you in a different demonstration a bit later on in the video where I have my other sleeve at a lower point from the notch. And so here for the back, I'm doing the same thing. I did not mark my point at the neck for the back. I just tried to get whatever seemed to be normal or whatever I could get from the notch to the neck point, to my neck. And that took some trial and error itself as well. You don't want to bring the line to the curve of the neck to the side curve because then that will be the design will be showing on the side. And this is a raglan sleeve design. You want it to show at the back as well, even though my lines are pretty shallow in my opinion, not that much. But anyways, my designs are set for the bodice, and now we're going to create the raglan sleeve. So like I said, notches connected to notches on the sleeve and the bodice, and my shoulder tip is 3/8 of an inch away from the center line of my sleeve. And the reason why is because if I had left it on top of the sleeve head, my dot would be too large because my dot is going to start from the center line on my sleeve. And so I drew something with my pencil just to show you the amount that will be blended in with my raglan sleeve design. And I placed my reduced ease sleeve on top just so you can see how I still have a lot of ease on my sleeve, even though some of it is blended. And so right now I am placing my bodice on top of my sleeve, and I'm making sure my shoulder tip is 3/8 of an inch away from the center line of my sleeve. So notches to notches, and the shoulder tip comes 3/8 of an inch away from it. And for your sleeve, your shoulder tip may be on top of your sleeve head. That is fine. It's just that for me, I prefer to use my set-in sleeve because I don't have wrinkles with my set-in sleeve, at least very minimal, and I want to make sure I get the same result for my raglan sleeve. That's why I'm using my satin sleeves. But whatever sleeve you're comfortable using, just use that. Whatever you have on your sleeve, that's what you're going to get on your raglan sleeve as well. So I'm doing the same thing for the back, notches to notches, and bringing the shoulder tip horizontal to the front shoulder tip. So I want to make sure it's on the same level as my front shoulder tip. I hope that makes sense. So I want to make sure the back shoulder tip is on the same level as the front shoulder tip. So I'm marking a perpendicular line from my center line to make sure things are placed horizontally and leveled. Even though later on I did realize that it did not look too leveled, so I did make some adjustment later on, but you want to make sure the shoulder tips are on the same level. That's just what I'm trying to do here. And once that's the case, I'll go ahead and place my tape down and tape my piece down and then start working on my design. And now that my tape pieces are down, I am going to mark 2 inches from where my shoulder tips are leveled. Wherever yours are leveled, that's where you mark 2 inches from on the center line of your sleeve. And that is your dot point. So I connect that to my shoulder tip at the front and at the back. And once that was done, that's when I realized that my shoulder tip at the back was not really that leveled. Even though it had seemed like it when I did so with the ruler, I realized once I placed my dot, it looked completely different. And my dot leg also looked quite a bit longer than I have had it before when I have created my pattern before. So I made some adjustment and brought that shoulder tip lower from the back shoulder tip. I brought that lower and then I placed my tip pieces back on there and made sure it's leveled with my shoulder tip at the front. And as you can see here, my dot is still large, so I am going to draw curves with my curve ruler to turn it into a curvy dot so that when I sew things together, it's not too pointy. So to do that, I am marking 3/16 of an inch from each shoulder tip, and I am going to connect that mark to my dot point that is on the center line of my sleeve. I am going to connect that to the 3/16 of an inch mark that I mark from each shoulder tip. And so that creates a curvy dot, which will lead to a very smooth dot tip when I sew my piece together. And now that we have a curve going, it has to finish somewhere and it cannot finish at the neck of my shoulder line because that would look weird when the garment is on. So to fix that and to taper it off, I am going to mark 3/16 of an inch again at the middle of my shoulder line for the front and for the back. I am marking 3/16 of an inch at the middle of my shoulder line for where I will bring the curve and start tapering it down to my neck point. And all that is because you do not want that curve to go all the way to your neck point because when you put your garment on, your shoulder line would be raised in a way that looked very superficial. So because we have a curve going on, I had to continue it and end it somewhere. And so from the neck part, I will be making that more flat to blend into the curve line that I have going on. And so here I'm using the other side of my ruler in order to blend things in, to blend my curve towards the neck point on my shoulder line. And I'm going to do the same thing on both sides for the front and for the back. I am going to use my curve ruler on the other side to blend my shoulder line now that is somewhat curved. And this is a common instruction that you will see in books. I'm pretty sure I've seen this somewhere more than one place where people do their pattern this way and then they have to blend it in so that when you do so in your garment it does not look strange. Well, they don't say why, but I'm assuming that's the reason why. And if your shoulders are more sloped, I would imagine that you would need to blend things in towards the shoulder tip instead. My shoulders are broad and I feel like this is fine for me. This works for me, has worked before, and so I know it will work. But if your shoulders are more sloped, maybe bring the blend it in closer towards the shoulder tip. And so now I am just removing all the extra lines that I don't need on my pattern so that you can see what I'm left with. And I am pretty much almost done with this. All I have to do is finish off my neck lines and then just mark my notches, which will be at the shoulder tip. There will be notches at the shoulder tip. And then, yeah, I just have to finish off my design and I will be done. And just like I did in my last video, I prefer to use my tracing wheel instead of cutting my pieces and then taping, leaving them taped to my sleeve. I prefer to just use my tracing wheel, trace over the design line, trace over my notches, and then remove my pattern piece and then just use my pen to go over the marks that the tracing wheel left on my pattern piece. And then that completes my design, that completes my pattern piece. And yeah, if you don't have a tracing wheel, I suppose you could use pins and just spin through the design lines on top of the sleeve pattern and then use your pin to connect the lines that are created, the marks that are left by the pins. And then I'm using my ruler here to help me as well. And I'm pretty much done with my raglan sleeve pattern. Make sure my notches are there. And here I am just cutting my pieces from my bodice where my design line was placed. I just removed the excess Instead of me cutting this and then placing it on my piece, on my sleeve piece, I prefer to do things this way. I just feel like it looks cleaner to me, and so that's how I continue to do things. And I'm pretty much done with this pattern. From here, I'm just cutting off all the excess from my raglan sleeve. And then I will move on to create the two-piece raglan from this actual design. This is the first set. The second demonstration, I will be doing it with a lower arm side, just like I did the previous raglan sleeve video for the dotless one. I had a regular arm side and I had the lower arm side. So I'm doing the same thing here as well. Here I'm making sure my notches are placed from where my shoulder tape was. That's where I have my notches, and my design is done, at least for this sleeve. And next, I am going to create now a two-piece raglan sleeve from that first design. And I am using my ruler to help me extend my bicep line. So I'm going to extend my bicep line on each side of my sleeve here. And that's what's going to help me get started. I am marking my center line, of course, because the pieces meet at the center, the front and the back. And I am going to separate the front from the back. So I need the center point. And so I'm starting by copying my front piece first. And that's the part that I will be removing first from the sleeve. So I am tracing my front piece of the sleeve of the raglan sleeve, and then where it meets at the center, once I remove the sleeve from the paper piece, I will be connecting the center marks. And just like that, my front piece is done for my two-piece raglan sleeve, and I'm moving on to the back piece to create the back piece. To do that, I'm making sure my bicep line is connected on that piece of paper that I had underneath my pattern. And once that is the case, I am gonna bring my original pattern piece, my raglan pattern piece, over and making sure the bicep line from there is aligned with the bicep line on my piece of paper. And it is important to have a piece of paper that is wider than your original pattern so that you can make sure you trace the pieces on it in a way that keeps them separated. And they are connected at the center line, of course, so you want that to be distant from each other. You want to draw them or trace them, copy them at a distance from each other from the center line. And so I am now tracing my back piece as you see, and I make sure my center points are marked from the dot point, and at the bottom of my sleeve, my center points are marked. And then I go ahead and trace around my pattern piece. And then once I'm done, I connect the center points together. And just like that, my raglan sleeve is separated. So now I have a two-piece raglan sleeve, front and back. And to finish it off, I am going to mark half an inch on the bicep line on each side. From the front, I am marking half an inch on the bicep line. In the back, I do half an inch as well. And so I'm going to connect my shoulder curve onto that half an inch using my curve ruler. And I'm doing the same thing for the front and for the back. And as you may see, I make sure my curve is blended from the notch that is at the shoulder tip as much as possible. If it is possible, just do it that way. And now I am marking half an inch at the bottom of my sleeve also. And I do so on each side. For the front, I do half an inch away from the bottom of the sleeve. For the back, I do half an inch mark. And then I'm connecting that half inch mark to what is on the bicep line. And just like that, my two pieces are done. I just have to make sure my notches are well into my pattern piece. And once I'm done doing that, I am going to cut my pieces out, cut off all the excess, and reveal my actual pattern. And everything is completed. And that half inch I added for the on the bicep line and on the bottom of the sleeve is because I saw that in Helen Joseph Armstrong's book. Even though I don't follow her pattern all the way through, I thought that was interesting to do. And in her book, she suggests that your pattern is actually completed after you add the half an inch on each side and then you connect it together and create one piece sleeve that way. I don't do things that way. I get results that work for me the way I do mine, and so I just leave it as is. And moving on to the next design where I am creating a raglan sleeve with the lower Armscye. I showed you in the previous video how I lower the Armscye, and I showed you also how to create a lift, how to add a lift or a built-in gusset. So I went ahead and did that with my lowered Armscye sleeve, and that's what you're seeing here. This sleeve is with a lower Armscye, and it has a lift added to it. So my sleeve is copied and I am now going to create my design on the bodice. So because my sleeve is lowered, I'm also going to lower the arm side on my bodice as well. And I am lowering it by 1.5 inch, just like it is on the sleeve. And like I said, I have a previous video that shows you how to do that, lower the arm side on the bodice and the sleeve, and how to add the lift as well in the previous video. I will link it to this video so you can check it out, but I am lowering the arm side on my bodice and I am connecting the point where I lowered it to my notches. So from my notches to 1.5 inch down the side seam. And once that connection is done with my curved ruler, I go ahead and cut off the excess, all that extra that I just marked. I remove it to make my bodice lower in the arm side. And so that's done. Now I am going to start my design. First, I'm just checking to see how low can I go because I want to have a smooth design line on my bodice. So I was just checking to see how low can I go to where I can get my shoulder tip to still be at 3/8 of an inch away from the center line. So that's what I'm checking for. I am checking to see how low can I go past my notch point, because if I do go from the middle of my neck curve to my notch, it's not going to be a smooth curve for me, not what I would want at least. I want a subtle S curve, just like I just did. And I'm doing the same thing for the back as well. I am going below my notches and connecting a curve to my neck and make sure it is smooth with my armhole. And now that that's done, I am going to measure with my tape measure from my notches to where my curve reaches on my armhole. And I'm going to mark that from the notches on my sleeve, mark that measurement there as well. I'm doing the same thing for the back, measure from the bottom notch to where my curve reaches on my armhole and place that measurement from my bottom notches, my bottom notch on the sleeve as well, and mark that. And now I am going to start my design. So it is 3/8 of an inch from the center line for the front shoulder tip. That is at 3/8 of an inch from the center line of my sleeve. And so once I make sure that's the case, I tape my piece down. I'm doing that for the front and the back. Tape my pieces down before I go ahead and design my raglan sleeve. And remember, the shoulder tips, they are supposed to be on the same line. They're supposed to be leveled. So make sure you lay down your pieces just to make sure that is the case, that the front shoulder tip and the back shoulder tip of the bodice, they are leveled. And now I'm just making sure my new notches are placed on the bodice as well. And just like I did previously, from where my shoulder tips are leveled, I am going to mark 2 inches down on my center line from that point. And so if yours is at the top of the sleeve, you're going to mark 2 inches from there on the sleeve center line. And now I'm creating my dot by connecting my point to the front shoulder tip and my back shoulder tip. And as you can see, my dot, in my opinion, it is still wide. And so I am going to do the same thing that I did previously, mark 3/16 of an inch from the shoulder tip. That is half of a centimeter. So I do that and then use my curve ruler to create a curved dot using those points, the 3/16 of an inch mark that I place on each side of the shoulder tips. I connect my dot point to them, and now I have a curvy dot. And now I'm just erasing the initial dot that I had with the straight lines and just getting rid of that. And next, as I did previously, in the middle of my shoulder line, I place 3/16 of an inch again, or half a centimeter. I do that for the front and for the back. And I am going to connect my curvy dot to that point at the back, and also from the dot point to the shoulder line mark that I place at the middle of my shoulder line. And as I did previously, I will then use the other side of my curve ruler to then finish off my shoulder line by making sure the rest of it is flat and not curved, and blend it in to that curvy line. And that's what I'm doing now. And I'm pretty much almost done with my raglan sleeve. I am going to mark my notches on my shoulder tip because they are connected there. And I will be finishing off my neck curve as well. And also, it's important to make sure that my new notches are well defined. So I am making sure that's the case because that's what I'm using now. And of course, for the back, we have two notches on our designs, and for the front, we have one. So, like I did previously, I prefer to use my tracing wheel, and that's what I'm doing here. Instead of me cutting the pieces from the bodice and then attaching them to my sleeve, I prefer to just use my tracing wheel and then just use my pen to go over the designs, the design lines that is from the front bodice. And it just is a lot less messy to me that way, and so I just do things that way. It looks cleaner to me. So I'm using my curve ruler, of course, to finish things off, and I am done with my one piece raglan sleeve with the lower arm side. So I will be cutting everything off from my sleeve and my bodice pieces, and just like that, my one piece raglan sleeve with dot with a lower arm side is completed. And then I'm moving on to creating the two-piece raglan sleeve with the lower arm side. So I have my pattern here that I just created with the one piece that I just created. So now I am marking my bicep line on my pattern because with the arm side being lowered, I did not mark the bicep line. So now I am doing so by connecting the front underarm to the back underarm with a line that is my bicep line now, and I'm extending it off of the pattern onto the piece of paper that is underneath it. That is what I'm going to use to help me disconnect the front from the back, separate the front from the back. That way I'll have two-piece um, pattern piece, a raglan sleeve, two-piece raglan sleeve pattern. And just like I did previously, I copied the front piece first. I copy all around it, making sure I mark my notches, my notch points, and make sure I mark the center point because that's where I'll be separating things from. And once I trace the front piece and make sure I mark the center, and remember my dot actually does not cut all the way through inside my paper. And so I did have to go over it with my pen, leaving indentation, and then trace over it on the center point that is. And so I'm finishing that off. And then next, I am going to connect my bicep line together before I finish off my front piece, where I just close that piece and finishing it off. I am just finishing off my bicep line, connecting it from where I extended it onto the pattern. And now I am just finishing the front piece, and that is the beginning of me having my piece separated. And so now that means I have most of my front piece done for my two-piece raglan sleeve. It's not finished yet, but I have most of it done. So now I am getting the back also separated from my main piece. I make sure the bicep lines are aligned, and I am copying, tracing my back piece and making sure I get all my notches marked and the center points are marked because that's where they'll be connected. And so once that's done, once I'm done tracing all around it, I will just be connecting the center points together. And that will give me my back piece for my two-piece raglan sleeve. That is most of it. And I will be finishing it off the way I did the first one. And that is by me adding half an inch on the bicep line next to the front and the back. At the bicep line, I add half an inch, and I will do the same thing at the bottom as well. Half an inch at the end of my sleeve, from half an inch from the front and half an inch from the seam of the back. And then I draw my line, and then I'm going to connect the line to the shoulder curve of my pattern pieces. And that will complete my two-piece raglan sleeve pattern. And you do see where my notch is at the shoulder, so I try to blend things from there as much as possible. If it doesn't reach it, that's even better. But if it does, I try to make sure it is blended from there because that's my shoulder tip notches. That's where my shoulder tip should be. And so I try to make sure things are blended from there because that will be dropping from my shoulder to my arm. So and I am now making sure my notches are marked on my pattern, and then everything is done. I am just going to cut it out and reveal my final pattern. That is what I have now, and I am leaving things as they are. Now I have my two-piece raglan sleeve pattern completed, and all of my patterns are done. And next I will be cutting things out onto paper, onto fabric. And the reason why you may see grease marks on my pattern pieces, I am realizing that using coconut oil for moisturizer may not be a good idea before I create patterns. So that is something for me to change. And next I'm just showing you how I create facings for my pattern. And I am showing you how to create a one piece facing, but it does not have to be a one piece. You could do it from the front to the side to one piece of the sleeve, which would be your side seam, or you could do and also from the back to the side, but I'm just showing you how to do a one piece facing. And that is going to be with the fold on back, my pattern cut on fold at the back. And so for my facing, that's the same thing. My pattern is going to be cut on fold at the back. Therefore, I'm creating my facing that way. And I did decide for one of my pattern, I will add the dots. I will sew in the dots. And for the other, I will just leave it as is and just leave it casual. So you can have an idea of what the different looks may be. And the reason why I'm creating raglan sleeves is because I do like manipulating them and create puffy raglan sleeves. And that is why I am trying to show you how the pattern is done or how I make my pattern. It is pretty much a combination of different things that I've seen, honestly, and just stuff that I just guess that may work for me and it just so happens to work. So it's just a bunch of mix of things I've seen, what I feel may work for me, and just combining everything together. That's how I come to my pattern. And so I do show the pattern because I want to show you how to manipulate them. And I have all my pieces cut out now, and I do have a dot. So the dot, it's not often sewed all the way through to the dot point, and so I have a pin there on my pattern piece where my dot point is, and I am going to mark that point with my chalk, with my tailor's chalk, because my dressmaking pen pencil was not working. So I will show you how I do that. And right here, I am just making sure that my seam allowance is narrower from the dot point to the shoulder notches. I want to make sure it is narrower there, and that's how I will be sewing, keeping in mind that my seam allowance is much more narrow from those notches to the dot point, and then it's just regular from there onto the neck point. So here I am marking, well, I'm trying to do it with my pencil, but it's not working, so I'm using my tailor's chalk. I am marking from where I put my pin through the dot point because I won't be necessarily sewing all the way through, or if I do, I want to know for sure this is where I am going to finish my sewing stitches. And so I go ahead and use my pins to just pin my seam allowance together, making sure I connect the notches and my notch points together, my notches together, and my pattern is ready to sew. And I did have to ease in because it is a curve. So here for my two piece on the bicep line, I did create I did place notches, and so that made it easy for me to connect my two pieces together. For the other sleeve, I am making sure I do the same thing where my dot point is. I am going to mark that so I know where to sew up to. And once that's done, I remove all my pins and then I pin my seam allowance together, and then my piece is ready to be sewn. And because on the pattern, my dot does not really reach all the way to the point where I marked, it is not necessary that you sew all the way to there, but you do need to have a smooth stitch going because you don't want to have your dot poking. So whatever you do, you just make sure you have a smooth stitch going to end smoothly on that sleeve. And right here, I have my back piece for the lower Armscye bodice, and I am going to attach my sleeves to the front and the back. So I did add my dot to this bodice. The other one I did leave my dot loose. And from here on, I feel like everything is pretty much self-explanatory till the end of the video. So I will just let you watch everything. Stay tuned to see the results on how everything turns out looking. So this is the result and what everything turns out looking like. You can see how the two-piece sleeve, it is a bit more rounded, more soft than the one-piece sleeve with dot. It is more tailored. And the only reason that is because I did not add the extra 1 inch like I did for the two-piece, where I added one half an inch on each side, resulting to it being a bit larger. Then that means I added 1 inch to the bicep line. I did not do that for the one piece. So you choose to do things how you do them. If you do follow Helen Joseph Armstrong's instruction, I would imagine both sleeves would end up looking similar because you would be having 1 inch extra to both of your sleeves. So that's that. I do think both sleeves are necessary to have the one piece and the two piece because there are certain designs that you would do. I will share some designs where you need the two piece to get that design, and some designs the one piece is just better to have. So I do think it's important to have both of them.